Sure. My name's Johnny West. I'm the founder of OpenOil, which is a company based here in Berlin, which seeks to produce better governance outcomes in the world oil industry. Sure. We've started research into the possibility of fair trade oil from Libya. I stress it's early stage research, and even when we've concluded this study, that will simply be a preliminary study to see whether there's enough possibility to take forward fair trade, because we are very conscious of the possibility of getting these concepts wrong. I just want to put that out there first, and if something is going to be fair trade, then it really needs to have rigorous standards applied to it of what fair trade is, and these are standards which the fair trade movement has evolved over a number of years. So with that qualification, what I would say is that since the revolution in Libya last year, we've been twice, and we're going back again in March, and we have quite extensive contact with the oil industry there, both the management of companies and people in the government and civil society. And because of the revolution, and because there's a new leadership, it appears that there might be an opportunity to persuade the leadership that they would like to implement something, a fair trade initiative around their own oil production, which would help them channel a lot of energy into making sure that the best standards are now used in the Libyan oil industry around environment, around community relations and rights, and around the management of revenues, to make sure that there is no repetition of the massive corruption and theft of oil revenues that happened under the last regime. Two reasons. We choose Libya, first of all, because there has been a revolution, and so there is a clean page and a leadership that is not burdened with the baggage of the past and incumbency. So that's a political reason. There's also a technical reason, which is that Libyan crude oil is what's known as light and sweet, which means it goes through less stages of processing than most other kinds of crude oil, number one. And number two, the Libyan state owns various companies which occupy all parts of the value chain, from the well deep in the Sahara Desert, through the pipeline, to the coast, to refineries, to shipping, to petrol stations all across Europe. Libya has invested in what's known as downstream parts of the oil industry for years as part of its sovereign wealth fund. And what that means is that one entity owns a number of companies which could be capable of certifying the whole process from start to finish. Now, this is unusual in the oil industry because it's far more normal for that value chain to be broken up across several companies. So then, if you were investigating the possibility of really making sure, really certifying that these standards were being met, you would have to be dealing with several different companies and agencies, and there might be room for disagreement or vague interpretation, or it might be too difficult to negotiate with all of these 4 or 5 different people. Whereas if the Libyan government, once there is an elected Libyan government, which will be in a few months, if the Libyan government decided as a strategic objective that it wanted to try and be the first people in the world to deliver fair trade oil, however that is defined, then one set of decision makers is in a position to make sure that the preparation for that certification happens at every stage along the way. The three main areas which you would look at, which we are looking at, are environmental, community interactions of one kind or another, whether that could be people who live in areas where oil is produced, or it could be people who work for oil companies, and revenue management, making sure that the money that the Libyan state gets as its share of all of this activity goes into the treasury and is then part of the public budget and is accounted for publicly, rather than going into the pockets of private people or ministers or sons of ministers. So those are the three main areas. We have been to see the Fair Trade Organisation in Bonn, and we're also in contact with a couple of people who've done very broad research into fair trade movements generally. The initial response is one of interest. I think it's fair to say, I mean, there is of course a fair trade goal, but oil as a commodity is produced and processed and sold very differently from the way the commodities that the fair trade movement has dealt with historically are produced and sold. And so you would have to take those things into account. For example, fair trade coffee is essentially a relationship between, the fair trade movement seeks to be a trusted intermediary between the consumer and the small-scale producer, a small-scale farmer in Kenya, let's say, or Tanzania. And the mechanism is about persuading the farmers to sign up and then to agree to a system of certification, and the objective is to make sure that they receive a specific amount, or a minimum specific amount of revenue, and then it's fair in that sense. Now, in oil, there are no small producers. Small in an oil company is 100 million euros. I mean, so there's not really a question of that, and there is not a question at the consumer end, we don't think, of being able to charge a premium, which also happens with coffee or with bananas, because they are discretionary products. I can either buy coffee or I can buy tea, or I can buy this coffee or I can buy that coffee, or I can buy bananas or I can buy oranges. But if I drive a car, I'm going to buy petrol. It's not discretionary in that sense, and the competition is so fiercely determined by price as opposed to brand differentiation that in a beginning stage we don't anticipate that it would be possible to operate a premium as well. So that then leads you to different questions, and interesting questions, like why would somebody do that then? Why would the Libyans do that if they weren't going to get any extra money for it? I mean, in the case of a coffee farmer, if you're going to get 5% extra or 10% extra or even more, that's clearly the key motivation. There may be other motivations, but that's the key motivation for why you do it. So why would the Libyan government do it? Well, we've been talking to people in the oil ministry and in the oil minister's office, and there are two possible reasons. One of them is outward facing to the rest of the world, and one of them is inward facing. The outward facing one is that Libya is a country which for 40 years, for modern history, has been known for terrorism and political stupidity, I think it's fair to say, of one kind or another. And if you're Libyan, that's sad and depressing. And unfortunately, the way that Colonel Gaddafi died last year also means that now, if you're Libyan, you were known as coming from the country of Gaddafi, and now you're known as coming from the country which killed Gaddafi in such an unfortunate and non-judicial way. So what you might call country brand, the brand of Libya as an entire country. Libya, like all countries, does actually spend quite a lot of money on trying to promote its image. There are public relations firms in Washington, in Brussels, in London, who are trying to improve the reputation of Libya. But if you could genuinely achieve certification for fair trade oil, which is the country's main export, you would, that would be a real achievement which would improve the country's reputation far more than just a clever advertising campaign. So that's the outward-facing reason. And then the inward-facing reason is, of course, all of this depends on genuine will to implement this by a new government, and that remains to be seen. All that we're doing now is preliminary research to see how it could happen if there was that goodwill. But if there was that goodwill, then that government will want to achieve improvement in a lot of areas of life in Libya, particularly in the areas of transparency and corruption and ensuring that government is clean. Now, those are very big values, and it's very difficult to form a practical program around those values. I mean, just as any policeman will tell you, in fact, that you cannot have a crime-free society, that the job of minimizing crime while maintaining public freedom is a never-ending job. So the job of having clean government is an endless task. And the problem with that is, how do you gain credibility? How do you measure whether you're making progress? How do you motivate people? So if, on the other hand, you are channeling something through a vehicle, in this sense the fair trade could be a vehicle that over the course of 3 years, here is our 3-year plan to achieve fair trade certification, which means we then need to do this as regards to our environmental standards, we need to do that as regards the consultations and negotiations that happen with local communities and workers, and we need to do this with regard to financial transparency. It becomes, you have taken this big, endless value and given it a specific shape which allows everyone to understand and to work together to achieve a specific project. So a value turns into a practical project. And when you are dealing with, companies or officials in ministries, everybody understands what the plan is, quarter by quarter, year by year, over, let's say, a 3 to 5 year period. So it's a very good way to potentially channel people towards practical goals which improve governance. We are interested in Libya precisely because, I have to say, in the question of oil, this is a tremendously difficult concept, and Libya, for now, represents a possible window where it might be easiest. Easiest still means hard. So I don't think I could even answer that question before we see whether it's possible in Libya. If in the best case it was possible and then it went ahead and it happened, I think it might be possible then to see how you could look at trying to apply those methodologies in contexts where the value chain was more cut up, as I described before, and there were more players and so on. But Libya is already hard enough. So I think we have a look at Libya first and then look at other places. Well, any certification process has to be falsifiable to be genuine. You have to be able to say yes or no, has this standard been met in a clear way. So first of all, you need to bring a set of such measurements in each of those 3 areas. And here I guess the question is, there are standards which apply in each of those areas. Of course, I mean, there are standards, there are environmental standards now which have certain currency and the same with financial management and so on. So can you string together pre-existing sets of standards so that you avoid, you know, reinventing the wheel. So one measure of success is whether you can put those standards together in a way that makes logical sense, coherent. And then, you know, the second measure of success will be if those standards are actually met, if you see what I mean. It's hard to say because, you know, we found quite a lot of interest from senior Libyan officials, but at the same time, this is a country which has 3,218 other things to think about. So, you know, there are elections, there's a constitution, there's the question of security, maintaining social peace. All of these things are very massive priorities. I mean, that's okay, I guess, because I think realistically we're looking at 2 to 3 years even to formulate what standards might be and then work towards implementing them. So, you know, it's not probably going to work unless things stabilise more generally, more broadly in Libya. But, you know, so I see it as slow, and slow is necessary to be credible. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that can happen within 3 months or 6 months.